Courage is a vital aspect to human society. It is a God-given trait whereby a person shows resolve, steadfastness, and strength in the face of adversity. It is in itself paradoxical how a person can run towards danger and trouble when every bodily instinct, and oftentimes many outside voices as well, implore the individual to run the other way. It is what makes a man take a bullet for his friend, or firefighters run into a burning building when the natural reaction is to run out. It is the fuel that drives people to sacrifice and even die for those they love. In this special episode of A Moment in History, you and I will journey back together through the timeline of American history. The 250-year story of this country is full of individuals who exemplified courage in the face of danger, who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult, and who put their own lives on the line to save others. The greatness and success of this nation is entirely wrapped up in the courageous sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of men and women who believed in the importance of doing what is right, even at great personal cost to themselves. These are the stories of heroes. Some are well known throughout history, while others may not be so. But no matter their origin, these heroes understood in life and in death the words from Jesus of Nazareth in the Holy Scriptures. Greater love has no one than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Our first example of courage comes at the birth of the nation itself, as the fledgling 13 colonies took on the most powerful empire in the world, the British Empire. The very first battle in the war showcased the courage of these men who simply desired fair treatment, not much else, and realized the only way they could get it was if they broke away from the monarchy and governed themselves. This is the opening battle of the Revolution, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. On April 19, 1775, the American War for Independence began with the Battle of Lexington and Concord. In truth, the dramatic events actually began the day before, on April 18th, or more specifically, the night before. The Redcoats had arrived in full strength on the American continent to put down the rebellion, and they would begin in the regions surrounding Boston. Now, the citizens living in the region did not know it, but on April 18th, they were actually in grave danger. The American Sons of Liberty had gathered intel that the Brits would make an attack on the town of Concord, and they sent 2 patriots to attempt a furious night ride to warn the citizens in the surrounding region of the attack. The 2 riders were a tanner named William Dawes and a silversmith named Paul Revere. Revere's ride would become the stuff of legend, but contrary to the stories, he most likely did not ride through the town shouting, "The Redcoats are coming! The Redcoats are coming!" To protect the secrecy of the mission, he would have tried to be as discreet as possible. When he was not on his horse, he most likely would have crept through the dark streets from home to home, quietly sharing the secret intel with the resident colonials so they could assemble to fight. And assemble they did. The colonists had a tall order: take on the most powerful empire in the world and win the fight for their freedom. The Americans were ready. The British arrived on April 19th and the battle began. Lexington and Concord consisted of several scattered musket volleys between the Redcoats and the colonists, and both sides inflicted significant damage on the other. The vastly superior British army was surprisingly neutralized by the colonists. The Americans used their home field advantage to surprise the Redcoats within the forest and hills surrounding Boston. Despite an overall lack of training and marksmanship, the colonists brought heavy damage on the British. Now, historians debate whether there was a clear winner from the Battle of Lexington and Concord, as both sides inflicted significant damage on the other, but the fact that the Americans held their ground and withstood the Redcoat attack was a huge victory in itself. Lexington and Concord would give them the confidence they needed to stand up to the British Empire and, after 8 grueling years, finally win their independence in 1783.
There are moments in life that define us. Choices determine the courses we take. Choices that create life, or those that save a life. And some make life worthwhile. There are decisions to stay or to go, to remain the same or to grow. Sometimes we pray and make peace. Other times we take a stand for what we believe. In celebration, mourning, triumph, and defeat, we are invested in every decision we seek. Despite differences, we have one thing in common: the desire to do all for the glory of God. Keep your wallet aligned with your heart and your investments in harmony with your faith. Timothy Plan, biblically responsible mutual funds, ETFs, and retirement plans. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing.
Hey there, it's Samuel Case from FISM News. If you're enjoying this feature-length A Moment in History show, and of course you are, I mean, it's awesome, you can go on to fism.tv/news to find the full archive of all our Moment in History minis. It's right on the homepage for FISM News. You'll be able to go through a back catalog, explore through the ages from ancient history up through the medieval period, all the way to the modern day, with some fun, interesting stories in between that you might not have heard in your history class while you were in high school. You'll want to check it out on fism.tv/news. Expand that knowledge, impress your friends. Now back to the show.
But history tells us in the first decades of the existence of the United States, the nation was sometimes the very opposite of united. The country extended westward and expanded its reach all the way to the Pacific Ocean, but within, a sinister force was at work, threatening to tear apart the very fabric of the country: legalized slavery. Now, this posed two massive threats to the future of the country. The first and most obvious was the corruption and immorality that slavery brought with it to the nation. A country that espoused freedom for all, but enslaved millions at the same time, was nothing but a system of hypocrisy and could not survive. And, there were many, such as the up-and-coming Illinois politician Abraham Lincoln, who understood this. The second was really the simple words from Lincoln himself that the country could not survive half slave and half free. With the secession of South Carolina and 10 other states that followed in 1860 and 1861, the nation was plunged into war. For 2 long years after, the pro-slavery South held the larger North at bay until the tide of freedom turned at the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. And at Gettysburg, there is to this day a poignant reminder of the courage shown by the men of the North: the Gettysburg National Cemetery. To understand the nature of this solemn place, we need to understand the conflict that first caused it to be created. The Battle of Gettysburg is one of the most iconic battles in world history. From July 1st to July 3rd of 1863, the Union Army and the Confederate Army met at the little hamlet of Gettysburg in southern Pennsylvania and nearly annihilated each other. The 3 days of brutal fighting saw over 50,000 casualties on both sides and roughly 10,000 dead. In the end, the Union Army under General George Meade drove back the Confederates under General Robert E. Lee, and this Union victory proved to be the turning point in the Civil War. Sure enough, the Union would go on to win the war less than 2 years later. Gettysburg, the formerly peaceful farm town near the root of the Appalachian Mountains, was overwhelmed by the amount of dead soldiers in the days following the battle. Residents of Gettysburg were left with the unpleasant and harrowing task of giving a proper burial to the men who laid down their lives as the bodies of those men began to decompose. Finally, with timely financial assistance from the state of Pennsylvania, a proper burial site was found. The land chosen was a hill just south of the center of town, where on the final day of the Battle of Gettysburg, the Union Army ferociously drove back a fierce rebel charge under General George Pickett. In October of 1863, while the war still raged on, the fallen Union soldiers at Gettysburg were honored with a proper reburial at the Gettysburg National Cemetery. Roughly 3,500 Union soldiers from the battle were laid to rest on the hill where many of those same had defended their country back in July. Those who had fallen on the Confederate side were denied burial at Gettysburg, but many were eventually reburied properly in southern states after the war. The dedication of the National Cemetery took place on November 19, 1863. On that fateful day, President Abraham Lincoln spoke some of the most profound words ever uttered in American history in a span of 2 minutes in what would become known as the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln made a promise in that speech that in the sovereignty of God would ring true, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. And sure enough, it did. Today, Gettysburg National Cemetery holds the bodies of more than 6,000 American veterans, not just from the Civil War, but also from the Spanish-American War, the First and Second World Wars, Korea, and Vietnam. In God's providence, the North prevailed, slavery was abolished, and the Union survived. Now, it was at this time in American history that a fascinating shift in the American psyche began to occur. Before the Civil War, Americans tended to refer to themselves by their state more than by their country. So, for example, I'm a Pennsylvanian, my cousin out west is a Texan, and my friend down south is a Georgian, and so on and so forth. But after the war, citizens of the United States began to truly see themselves as countrymen, as brothers and sisters, as Americans. With this rise in patriotism came also a desire to honor the courage of the men who had given their lives to defend the country's freedoms throughout her history. Thus was born the holiday to remember and celebrate the courage of those who had paid the ultimate price, Memorial Day. This day is much more than just a fun start to the summer months. It is a day in which all Americans should take special care to give thanks for the many who have died for the cause of freedom. Tonight, let's discover the history of Memorial Day in the United States. The sacred practice of honoring soldiers who have fallen in battle is ancient. In the United States, the freedom of one's country was always seen as a worthy cause to give one's life and was honored as such. But it was not until the American Civil War that the act of honoring the fallen in battle became a nationwide practice. While the Civil War was the most bloody battle in American history, it was also, interestingly enough, one of the best things that could have ever happened to the United States. Not only did it rid the nation of slavery, it also brought the nation together in a way that it had never been before. It was during the years immediately following the Civil War that both Northerners and Southerners generally stopped referring to themselves primarily by their state and started calling themselves Americans. Out of this patriotism grew a desire to honor those who had died for the cause of freedom and the nation during the bloody Civil War. In May of 1868, General John Logan, a Union veteran of the war, charged the country to institute an official day of remembrance and celebration for the brave men who died. This day was called Decoration Day, and for the next 100 years, Americans observed the day each year on May 30th. This day was the predecessor to what we now know as Memorial Day. Now, during World War I, something changed. People in the United States universally decided that it was better to honor not just those who had fallen during the Civil War, but in all American wars. Those who fell during World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam were added to the list that included all American wars before, like the American Revolution and the smaller campaigns of the 1800s. And throughout the early 20th century, the name Decoration Day was gradually replaced with a more accurate title, Memorial Day. Finally, in the late 1960s, during the war in Vietnam, and nearly 100 years since the holiday's unofficial birth, the U.S. Congress formally passed the Uniform Monday Holiday Act. This bill formally instituted Memorial Day as an official American holiday and reserved the last Monday in May as its permanent observance date. We celebrate this day each year, often with family, food, and fun, as I said before, and that's good. But let us never forget, though, to remember and give thanks for the sacrifice of those who believed their country and those they loved were worth dying for. As the United States was growing in patriotism and nationalistic pride, so were many other nations in the world. The need for courage and sacrifice would reach levels never before seen in human history with the start of World War I. Now, the Americans helped lead the Allied forces to victory, but sadly, the war to end all wars, as it was known, would do the exact opposite. 20 years after the end of the First World War, the Second began. After a breakout in Europe and the Pacific featuring the free Allied powers against the Axis, led by Hitler's insidious Nazi Germany, the United States entered the fray in December of 1941 after the unprovoked attack by the Japanese on Pearl Harbor.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
After several years of brutal fighting, the leaders realized an all-out invasion into Europe was necessary to force the Nazis into surrender. The campaign was codenamed Operation Overlord, and the Allied commanders targeted June 5th as the day that Allied soldiers would descend upon Europe. Now, in an interesting twist of history, the weather on June 5th was not conducive for the invasion, so General Eisenhower moved the invasion launch date back to June 6th, the day Americans would come to remember as D-Day. On the morning of June 6th, roughly 160,000 Allied troops descended upon the beaches of Normandy in northwestern France in a landing that has become the stuff of legend. Now, the Germans were not about to give up the continent without a fight, and many of the beaches were littered with German snipers in foxholes waiting to pick off the largely exposed Allies. On certain parts of the French coast, specifically at Omaha Beach, the survival rate for the initial waves of soldiers was 50-50. In those first initial days alone, as many as 4,000 Allied soldiers lost their lives, with many more captured, missing, or wounded. The cost was great, but it was worth it. The Allies, bolstered by more troops to double their numbers on the beaches, overtook the Germans on the French coast and gradually made their way across France in the summer of 1944. Finally, in late summer, the Allies freed the French capital of Paris. And with the Americans and Brits closing in on the west and the Russians penetrating the east, Nazi Germany's days were numbered. The D-Day invasion, though costly, was one of the greatest victories in American military history, and it spurred the Allies to victory over the Nazis in 1945. As you know, the Allies prevailed in World War II thanks to the courage of millions of military members who served, a generation that would rightly become known, by the way, as the greatest generation. But folks, it was not just military personnel who should be honored for their bravery. Ordinary citizens, men and women and children, have shown great courage in the midst of danger in this country because they believed in the cause they were defending. This courage even made it so far as the baseball field of all places, when on a spring day in Los Angeles in 1976, a Major League Baseball outfielder made one of the most memorable plays in baseball history in an act of true patriotism and courage. This man played Major League Baseball for almost 2 decades, from 1966 to 1984, and he was at best an average player, but he made a serious impact. He is most remembered for a great act of patriotism and heroism that took place at Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles in April of 1976. The man we will explore is Rick Monday, outfielder for the Chicago Cubs. And on April 25, 1976, in a game between the Chicago Cubs and the Los Angeles Dodgers, Monday made one of the most heroic plays in sports history. In the bottom of the 4th inning, the Dodgers were getting ready to bat, and Monday was warming up for the inning in center field when 2 fans jumped onto the outfield grass from the left field bleachers. The fans had an American flag with them, and quickly it became clear what they were trying to do. They pulled out lighter fluid and matches to publicly burn the American flag. Thinking quickly, Monday rushed over from his position in center field without a moment's hesitation. As the crowd became restless, realizing what was happening, Monday swooped in and snatched Old Glory from the hands of the protesters. The men were arrested, and the crowd at Dodger Stadium exploded in cheers and a standing ovation for the Cubs center fielder. And when Monday came to bat the following inning, the Dodgers fans gave him another standing ovation, and the scoreboard at Dodger Stadium read, "Rick Monday, you made a great play." Monday understood the significance of his flag. In the early part of his playing career, he had served in the United States Marine Corps Reserve. The season after he saved the flag, he joined the Los Angeles Dodgers and finished his career there. Today, he's one of the Dodgers' radio announcers, and he still has in possession the American flag that he heroically rescued on April 25, 1976. Often throughout history, we see the greatest acts of courage and self-sacrifice, the very best of humanity, when the stakes are highest. Perhaps no event in American history captured this spirit of courage than the darkest day in American history, which of course was September 11th, 2001. It was a day when, in the midst of catastrophic tragedy and heartache, ordinary citizens rose to the occasion to serve and protect their fellow man. On September 11th, 2001, as the mighty New York skyline was shrouded in smoke from the deadly terrorist attack that would bring down the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center and would kill several thousand innocent people, ordinary citizens did what they could to save those trapped on the island. This is the 9/11 boat rescue. Every American born before the late 1990s likely remembers the moment they found out that Islamic terrorists had orchestrated a horrific attack against innocent civilians on September 11th, 2001. Terrorists crashed planes into both towers of the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Almost 3,000 people were killed that day. Now, this is a rare moment in history that actually carries personal weight for me, as I remember watching these attacks unfold on television as an 8-year-old boy. I'm sure it carries such weight for all of you watching as well. But in spite of the chaos and horror surrounding the attacks, the day also brought out the very best in American citizens. Hundreds of firefighters, police officers, first responders, and ordinary citizens put their lives on the line to help those who needed it most. And one of the most underappreciated rescues in American history happened that day because of ordinary people caring for one another in an extraordinary way. Let's explore the inspiring story of the 9/11 boat rescue. At roughly 8:45 Eastern Time on Tuesday, September 11, 2001, a plane full of passengers slammed into the 95th floor of the World Trade Center's North Tower over Manhattan Island. At 9:03 a.m., a second plane smashed into the South Tower's 75th floor. What many had originally thought may have just been a horrific accident after the first explosion proved not to be so after the second. New Yorkers and Americans nationwide knew this was a deliberate attack. Hundreds were killed in the two plane crashes, including all passengers on board. During the 9 o'clock hour on the morning of September 11th, Americans learned that a third plane had crashed into the Pentagon, killing over 150 more people. At roughly 10 o'clock a.m., the South Tower, which was struck lower than the North Tower, could not hold the weight of the upper floors collapsing on itself and fell to the ground. A half hour later, the North Tower collapsed as well. And very quickly, city officials realized that they needed to halt traffic to and from the city to make way for the rescue. Therefore, the tunnels under the Hudson River and the bridges leading to and from Manhattan Island were closed. Unfortunately, this left hundreds of thousands of people trapped on Manhattan Island as smoke quickly engulfed the island. This is where ordinary American citizens were at their best, helping to orchestrate one of the largest civilian rescues in history. Throughout the month of May, FISM is partnering with Preborn to fund the light by providing 100 ultrasound machines to pro-life centers around the country. Now, how can you contribute? Well, for as little as $28, you can provide an ultrasound scan to an abortion-minded woman in crisis. And when that woman hears the heartbeat of her baby, she will choose life, get this, 90% of the time. It's remarkable. And guess what? With the help of a donor match, for every 200 scans donated, that's for a net value of $5,600, Preborn Ministries will be gifted an ultrasound machine to place at a clinic in need. Each machine has the potential to impact hundreds of thousands of mothers' choices. Preborn also offers additional support to mothers in need and presents the gospel to every mother who comes into their clinics, knowing that salvation is the greatest gift that can be given to a mother and her child. So go to preborn.com/FISM to give. That's preborn.com/FISM. What can you tell our listeners about the benefits of being a partner?
It's blessed me with an opportunity to help further the kingdom in a small way, which matters a lot because God takes small things and makes them big. The blessing really has been to be able to take care of my family, but also take care of the kingdom. Going to bed knowing that not only are you correctly managing your investments, but you're doing it in a God-honoring way.
When it comes to handling money, I'm lost. How to save, when to invest, where to invest. As a Christian, I don't want to give my money to people who are going to use it for things God hates. When I discovered financial issues, it was like a burden was lifted off my shoulders. Not only did I gain access to a simple investment strategy that I can manage myself, I also have the peace of mind that my money will not be going to companies that actively promote things that God hates.
Invest your money in a God-honoring way. Go to financialissues.org.
Here, in the face of great tragedy, hundreds of ordinary American heroes stepped in to help rescue these stranded souls. Realizing the dire situation at hand, the United States Coast Guard called for help. The Coast Guard issued an alert to all boat operators in the area, including the Hudson River, the New York Harbor, and even the northern New Jersey shore. The alert was a cry for help. All available boats, anyone who wants to help with the evacuation in Manhattan, report to Governor's Island. Captains and ship operators in the area answered the call. We probably don't know the exact number of boats that showed up that day, but some sources say there were hundreds. Another said he'd never seen so many boats converging on one place in his near 30 years working on the water. Tugboats, party boats, commercial boats, fishing boats, big ships and small crafts, and many more barreled towards Manhattan Island to rescue those trapped. Those who were there that day said it was like nothing they'd ever seen. Strangers helping strangers who were in need. Many of the boat captains, after filling up their decks, took the passengers to safety in another New York City neighborhood or mainland New Jersey and promptly turned around to go get more. This went on for the entire day into the afternoon and evening of 9/11. And in all, historians estimate that roughly 500,000 people were saved in the 9/11 boat rescue, making this the largest marine rescue operation in world history. But this is more than a feel-good story of remembrance. This is a prime example of Americans coming together to serve and love one another when the need was greatest. 9/11 was a terrible day and a day we will never forget. It is also a day that we can celebrate when American patriots were at their best, laying down their lives selflessly for their fellow man. Courage in the face of danger seems to go against every human inclination. Yet it is one of the most honored and valued traits of the human experience. Now, why is this? I believe without question that the fuel for courage is driven by self-sacrificial love. The soldiers of D-Day, the firefighters who ran up the stairs on 9/11 while helping others run down, the colonists at Lexington and Concord, the men buried at Gettysburg, would not have done what they did if they did not love the thing for which they were sacrificing, namely their country or their families or their beliefs. And ultimately, there is no greater sacrifice and example of courage than the man who was crucified on Calvary's cross 2,000 years ago, the God-man Jesus Christ. It was Jesus, after all, who said, "There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends." And it was Jesus who set that example for this great love when he died on the cross to save sinners who had rejected God. May we show this same sacrificial courage and love every day. Thanks so much, as always, friends, for joining me once again for a moment in history.